Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's live SPM workshop. Excited to have you all here today on behalf of Tempo. We're very excited to dive into this very hot topic of strategic portfolio management. We want to make this as valuable and as tailored to your specific challenges today as possible. So with that, we're going to start off with a quick poll question. So we'll pull up our first poll, and I'd encourage everybody to answer your specific challenge that keeps you awake at night, specifically related to your portfolio. So here's four options. If the option that you are constantly awake at 2 a.m. thinking about, put it in the chat and let's highlight some of those as well. These are just four options. I encourage you all to fill in kind of where you see fit. So is it visibility? Is it that strategic alignment piece? Is it resource constraints? Maybe it's just change and adaptability. So I'll give everybody a couple seconds here. John, what do you hear most that people are keeping themselves awake thinking about?
Well, personally, I think a lot of times it's are we doing the right thing? Uh, which actually kind of encompasses a couple of choices. It's hard to break it down, but part of it is um, doing the right thing now, because that leads to some of the change and adaptability. Sometimes I don't know. I've long in my career felt the increasing, let's say, pointlessness of long range detailed plans. Anyway, hi Shannon.
Speaking of long-range detailed plans, someone needs to help me with getting connected to the internet, but we are connected now. And I'm with our product and engineering team here at Tempo doing some planning for next quarter. So glad to join everybody, Rachel and John, and apologies to everybody who joined that I am late due to my technical incompetence this morning.
You are
Well,
all
at
good.
least you're pointing out you're not doing like a year-long roadmap or 2 year or 5 years. You said something reasonable,
Yeah.
like
Yep.
order.
Like a quarter or maybe in the next 2 weeks, because as we know, right? 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years is a very long time nowadays.
So let's take a look at, I guess, the challenges that most of today's audience are dealing with. Oh, okay. Looks like 18% are citing visibility, 16 strategic alignment. Not surprised, I guess, by the biggest portion here at 43% being resource constraints. And then the last one there, change and adaptability, 23%. I think all good topics to discuss and good, I guess, anecdotes to know as we go through today's presentation. So we'll close that poll and we'll talk through a little bit about the agenda for today. So today we'll be talking a little bit about why it's time to rethink how you scale and specifically around adaptive strategic portfolio management. We'll give an overview of Tempo's view of the SPM journey, talk about those roadblocks and reflect a little bit about how we can move past them. And obviously, John and Shannon are here to do just that for all of you today. So again, super interactive in the sense of if you have comments as we go throughout, or if there's any specific challenges that you're really dealing with today, we encourage you to put those in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll address those head on for you. We'll do an experience share. I think this is a great opportunity to talk a little bit about Shannon and John's experience. And obviously, they have all of the war stories that you all probably have similar experiences as well. So we'll go through that and then we'll look at kind of at the end the tempo advantage. And with that, I'll introduce formally today's speaker. So Shannon Mason, our Chief Strategy Officer here at Tempo, and then John Kern, obviously the co-author of the Agile Manifesto. Great to have you both here today and excited to talk through the SPM journey.
All around troublemakers on this slide for sure. John, I wanted to just tap on that poll that we just looked at, because the first thing that most folks responded back was resource constraints, and all things kind of flow from that. Like capacity is such a big thing. But before we dive right in, how do you see that relationship between capacity or resources humans, the talent.
Yeah.
And then the other pieces that we have, like, visibility issues or challenges with, understanding what our progress is in terms of, like, how are we hitting the budget, those sorts of things. How are those two related? Because for me, they're so intimately connected.
Yeah, I don't know if it's my aeronautical engineering background, but I can't not think like of a system or holistically that it's not just one of these things. The I think the most important thing is to set that direction of travel, the strategic, what you're trying to accomplish, and so often I don't know the lack of ability to have focus, the lack of ability to understand what true value is, so that we can tend to, instead of worrying about, the resources as constraints. I mean, yeah, they are, but instead, it's more typically we take a shotgun approach. We're not very good at deciding that we can literally spend 20% of that team's effort and probably achieve 80% of the value. So I think we fritter it away too frequently, and we get locked into things that keep us from being able to change and adapt because we do too big. So anyway, I could go on about this, but I think they're all related. And the visibility is, like, a lot of people complain because I can't see what y'all are doing.
Yep.
And yeah, so it's
Exactly. And then it's, do more with less, I'm sure is one of the things that's a refrain that's probably pretty common for the folks that are on this call right now. I know we're all being kind of asked to readjust our plans and our expectations, but still achieve as much as we possibly can, which I think is a good segue, Rachel, into the next slide around when we're thinking about things more from a static standpoint, then everything becomes kind of pinched. But if we start thinking about things in terms of more of a flow-based approach, where we are thinking from that system standpoint, John, as you mentioned, that then we're way more dynamic. And if we're dynamic, then we don't necessarily have these weird pinch points that happen because we're listening for signals. We're understanding how the work is impacting our organization, our teams, and we're also understanding whether or not the things that we're doing are actually achieving the goals that we want to. And this is something that, John and I spent some time over the last month traveling together, talking to customers that are in various states, I'd say. Some really needed very large bottles of whiskey. Others were, sleeping pretty nicely at night. But they all had like that core challenge around everything is moving much faster and continues to move faster because the pace of delivery will continuously improve because we drive towards that. But also, how do you keep an awareness of the constraints and the pressure put on the team in order to deliver? So that flow-based concept, I know, John, you and I have really connected on that. And what do you see as a shift, over the last, I'd say, 10 years in terms of that dynamic perspective versus more of that static perspective?
that's a great way to put it too. The challenge is the static for a lot of companies facing, the VUCA realities, the volatility and the
Uncertainty.
uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity, all that crap
Yep.
that acronym comes with. If you are not able to see what I would say the sort of the forest for the trees, it's so easy to get stuck on just that static view. And it's I think one of the biggest challenges most teams face is a lot of times it's up here. It's speaking of capacity, we can think of it as, do we have the human capacity, and do individuals in leadership positions and at the team, are we giving them the opportunity to even grow their ability to see this way? Because to some of us, it's super clear and obvious, but to those that it's not, this is the hard challenge. You can learn to have a wider perspective and to think with greater capacities. You can learn how to do that. But if you can't, this approach can seem like an anathema, and you just think, oh, I just need to predict and plan harder. Oh, that's why we missed it. And no, it's not. It's because you can never plan enough. You need to have more of a strategic view, and you need to think more like this. and have some tools that are much more flexible. And it's like as hard as it seems, a lighter touch is needed. And some of the things that I know I've seen your teams produce, that's what we need. We don't need bigger Gantt charts with more detail.
Bigger Gantt charts, more detail, more. I think the other thing for this group, one of the underlying constructs that we see in that shift of in the modernization of how organizations think about planning, their programs, their portfolio, their product lines, even their teams of teams. That flow construct actually comes from Mihai's work on individual flow state, because essentially, the largest line item in most organizations is the humans, right? It's the people that actually build the beautiful things that we all use, the products that get delivered, whether they're internal or external. And in Mihai's work, right, the task challenge and our capability, our competency to meet the task challenge are always in like alignment. The task is always a little bit harder than our capability, and we always reach it and we grow through that. And finding flow state basically means you have the ability to focus on what it is that's going to make us successful at the achievement of the task, if you will. And if we blow that out to think about the broader organizational dynamic that I think a lot of us are working towards, it's actually to create that in our whole company. It's like, how do we get our company into more of this flow state? And that gives us a little bit of, I think, a dichotomy between like what are older paradigms that we've seen or anti-patterns, and what are some new patterns that are emerging. Obviously, that thinking of dynamism is a big part of it. So for the strategic portfolio management construct, what we continue to see as an organizational competency, so like a skill set that the business has holistically. We were just talking about annual cycles. You were saying, oh, at least we're doing a quarterly plan. There's even shorter cycles that we can look at. Quarterly and annual, orientation towards goals is great. Like at the end of this quarter, we want to look like this. At the end of this year, we want to look like this. The narrative of our company is this as we go through the year, right? We will be this type of business at the end of the year. However, and this is one of the reasons why, at least for me, agile constructs and concepts always really aligned nicely. Is like, that's great to set that vision, but in order to get there, you've got a zillion different paths you can take and a lot of different steps that you take on a day-to-day basis to get there. And we need to elevate that concept and that thinking into our broader organization, because it speeds up our ability to make good choices. So continuous planning, right? John, you're kind of hitting at the old Eisenhower quote, plans are meaningless, planning is everything, right? It's a continuous activity that we do. And we use those quarterly and annual time frames as more checkpoints to see whether or not we're along that path. Other anti-patterns or evolve, I know an anti-pattern might not be the right word, but evolutions is a lot of times that team or people or resource allocation, if we're actually using, hardware too, as part of our thinking of resources, it's really fixed. And so it doesn't change. It's going to be the same quarter over quarter over quarter. And what happens when we integrate a more dynamic funding mentality or even a more dynamic teaming mentality associated to that? So we can go tackle the sorts of problems that are presenting themselves as our market shifts and our market changes. A good example of the benefits of dynamic teaming come from the Chilean miner crisis. I don't know if you remember that. And one of the things that we have as a concept is that stable, persistent, and consistent teams, they become predictable. We know what they can do. That's great. But because things start to shift in our landscape so fast, sometimes you want to pull together a team that has a bunch of different skill sets to tackle a challenge in a more dynamic fashion. And if you're doing a fixed allocation standpoint and a fixed funding dynamic associated to that, then those conversations don't happen because people are like, oh, these are my resources, these are my humans, this is my team. They don't go anywhere else to solve any other problems. And so what we have the ability to do is then think about, like, do we have the right collection of humans? In the Chilean miner example, there was folks from NASA, there were folks that were mining experts, there were folks that were deep sea diving experts and deep sea mining experts, and they all all came together to figure out the best way to actually solve that problem. It took them a little bit longer to actually storm and form, but once they did, they came up with the best solution to solve for that particular challenge. That's a dynamic thinking, and that opens up the ability to actually solve for some interesting challenges. John, I see you thinking there because I know you have some thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it makes me realize that 20 and 25 years ago, we created about maybe every 18 months sort of a tiger team. We formed a special team to kind of leapfrog the current technology that we're building and selling. And yeah, it's like the ability to rapidly reform and do things like the of course the non-planned Chilean miner thing is definitely superpower to be able to do that. And I think there's an interesting question around does this, if yeah, certainly from the services point of view, I've spent a lot of my life, maybe half of my career doing that kind of consulting, and I think that's probably slightly different, but at the same time not. So I think in terms of being able to, um, I think sometimes that's missing from large enterprises, missing out on the, how do we calculate the cost of this or that, the other thing? I don't know. I've often thought, well, you got a team of folks working on something. Can't you just use that as a pretty quick, rough order of magnitude of it costs this much money, whether they're twiddling their thumbs or working on the stuff you want? So I don't know, Shannon, but I think the ability to simplify, I think it gets down to I think a lot of times people want such fine-tuned numbers about things that aren't that accurate anyway, that it's this weird, self-fulfilling, impossible way to try to predict and plan, versus I think if you make things more dynamic, make things a little rougher order of magnitude, I bet you get to the same good enough answer that you can make decisions and change how easy it is for you to both project, tell people what it's going to cost, and dynamically kind of reshape how you're tackling your biggest, I wouldn't say threats, but rather maybe your biggest opportunities.
Yeah, I think that it's some interesting questions popping up in the chat. You and I have both been in consultancy. We've both done services delivery. I think the best experience that I've had with customers has been under the construct of an adaptive SOW, a fixed price adaptive SOW, where we have multiple paths that we can potentially take, and depending on what we learn and what we uncover, we're gonna go down different paths. And that adaptive construct, even in the services landscape or consulting landscape, what that allows us to do is actually be much more of a partner as we uncover things versus saying like, yep, it's all going to look like this. It's all going to end up like this. And that's honestly, it's been some of the better experiences of my time doing more services oriented work, has been in that sort of perspective of we know where we want to end up. We know that it might not necessarily look like this, predetermined pathway because it never looks like that. And so we're actually going to take more of an iterative approach to how we do that. But that requires you then to kind of ride shotgun with your client too as well, and make
Oh,
sure
for
that
sure.
they're incorporated into how we're proceeding. There's another question in here too around kind of like thinking about humans, agents, value creation. It's kind of related to a later question about how do we achieve goals? How do we understand how we're achieving goals? Teams and team changing. I think, what at least I'm advocating for is if our narrative for the organization in terms of what success looks like, what the objectives are for the business, what those are something that are living and they're something that we continuously reiterate to our organization, then we want to give enough bounded autonomy to our company for people to form and tackle those particular problems and find the right solutions, rather than, looking over and over and over again for high predictability, which sometimes leads to inertia, because we keep everything fixed, we keep everything static. So it's are there places in your business where it makes good sense to actually reformulate or think about dynamic teaming structures? If you're interested, Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School has some great research on dynamic teaming and how that benefits organizations. But also what we're talking about here is essentially making a plan, an annual plan, and hoping it comes true at the end of the year is probably not a winning formula. But it's way better to think about on a more regular check-in basis whether or not we're achieving those goals. We can use technology to understand whether or not we're achieving the goals, integrating that data, checking in with our teams to understand whether or not they understand their mission, because if they're connected to the mission, they work better as a group, they're more connected, more engaged. And those pieces are extremely important from a dynamic standpoint. So it's really just that change from thinking about things from a static standpoint to thinking about things from more of a dynamic standpoint. It's always changing, so why not change with it versus trying to force it into that static perspective?
Yeah, and it's such a contextual way that talking and waving our hands is kind of hard. Sarah asked about stable teams, and you can also, I might even say, stale. That can happen where you have stale teams because you just locked in and you're signed there. What are we doing? Well, we're actually building feature bloat because we're here, and so who knows what stability means, but certainly you don't want to jerk people around so rapidly that they're not producing value. So it's definitely not that. And at the same time, you don't want to be so, one team is starving and for being able to get stuff done, and they got maybe the most valuable things that the company could be working on, and you're not putting so it's a real the thing that I talk, there's also a question about, safe and this and the other thing about frameworks. For me, agility is a means to an end. It's not the end. Like I could care less about framework, sprints, Kanban. Sorry to step on people's toes, but that's not the point. The point is, do you have the ability for all your team members to be aligned and understand values so that we can use the brains that we pay a lot of money for to make micro decisions about can I do less to get further and then save that time and energy for doing other things. And that's the dynamic developmental organization that you want to try to promote. So it's not all things, it's not like we're doing widgets down on the assembly line. We are not a software factory. Some things do need boring and stable and simple stuff, while other things are the Chilean mine. That you better bring your A game. You better form something dynamic. You better have the ability to be resilient while that team is forming and storming. And that's the pinnacle.
Unlock that value. And I think this is, so we've got a variety of questions right now that kind of look at some research in a way that we've been doing here at Tempo. We've got folks that are in various places. So the pathway or the journey to this kind of adaptive perspective, we see oftentimes take those steps, right? And there's questions about frameworks and things. And frameworks, I think, John, you've heard me say, like, they're great gateway drugs, right? Like a framework can help get everybody like on the same path, but
Right.
that needs to be adapted to the situation or the scenario of your organization and made your own. And one of the things that we've done at Tempo is actually, gone out, reached out to a bunch of customers, spoken with those customers about what their journey looks like to actually achieve that holistic view of their portfolio of programs, product lines, teams of teams. And we see that there's like a little bit of a predictable stage journey that folks go through. And the majority of the respondents that we had, I think we had a few hundred. We did this research alongside Forrester. We're in this place where like they had somebody that was like definitely spearheading single departmental or program level visibility. Like they had like this like big motion internally to understand how is this system impacting other parts of the organization at the program level, and at the single departmental visibility standpoint, just like how do we operate more functionally as like a team or team of teams. And so if you see that in your organization, I'd say like go find those folks, or if you are that folk, like keep trying to make that visibility known, because those are usually where the initial data sensing happens that then informs the broader system of how we're executing against the goals and plans of the organization. And then once you start to see like, oh, a small change here or a big change over here has these downstream or upstream impacts, then the broader portfolio starts to get really engaged, because then we can actually start shifting some of the anti-patterns, some of that static behavior, to be more dynamic, because things do change so quickly, right? The beautiful thing, I think, at least over the last couple decades, if not 3 decades, is that the pace at which we can create and build is so fast, that it requires us to be far more forward thinking and far more just kind of adaptable, to not keep using that word, at the portfolio level. And that leads you to the strategic portfolio management side. And then we're thinking about holistically, what sort of data do we have around the outcomes? There was a question in there about like, how do we connect all of this piece in, like, right, connect all of that data in, and then use that data to create organizational flow so that we're doing micro pivots versus macro pivots. So this is just kind of that journey that we see a lot of organizations go on. And lots of folks are in different stages. Some folks are in that stage 4. I think some people are starting to really poke on what a stage 5 look like, especially with the advent of AI and taking big data and being able to add intelligence to it. But the majority are in that stage 2 to stage 3, because there's change. There's not a lot of oftentimes internal support that they get from that standpoint, and to make that change management occur in order to get into that strategic portfolio management piece. But Rachel, I think we have a poll to see where folks are at along this journey.
Yeah, we'll open that poll question. I guess based on the slide that you see here, let's hear from the audience. Where do you see yourself on this SPM journey? Shannon, I guess, spoke highly of high level of each of these different stages. So feel free to let us know where you see yourself at today. Obviously, tomorrow that could be a different stage, but let's hear from you all today, where you see your organization at on this SPM journey. We'll give everybody just a little bit of time, and then we'll share the results so that we can talk through specifically. We obviously ran some internal with our customers, some data around this particular topic, but it'd be great to hear from all of you. So, close.
John, for you, and because you spend a lot of time, and have spent a lot of time working with adaptivist customers, and before joining, yeah, tons of time out in the field. Where do you see a lot of the organizations that you work with in terms of this kind of model, this journey that they're on, and where do they tend to get stuck?
I think, I try to avoid giant behemoth organizations where it's mind-numbing, but a lot of times it doesn't take much before it's hard to even see what three things are competing for the attention of the engineering. And so I often seem to find myself being the one to bring attention to that. Oddly enough, but it's really common. And my so I think that's probably maybe three-ish, where there's three, different groups trying to compete for shared resources, let's call them, just shared development team. Um, I don't know. I was just talking to a team the other day, And I sensed this was a thing. And I said, well, it's really not for you all to solve. That's like, no, let's get those folks in the room and arm wrestle it. They need to talk whatever their language is to say, my thing's more important than your thing. And like, because I don't care. I'll just do them alphabetically if you can't figure it out. Um,
John and I were talking about I worked with a large telco company in their PMO for a while, and we had what we referred to it as the summertime cage fight, because we would pull out this spreadsheet of work. It was like 5,000 lines of work across the entirety of this very large set of programs inside the portfolio and associated the products and all of that. And it was oftentimes it was like we are going to duke it out. And then 2 months later, we started annual planning. And so we took that spreadsheet and added another 5,000 things to it. And it was just like, this doesn't work, right? So I think, yeah, one of the anti-patterns that you'll see here between these stages and like kind of the friction points between those stages is whether or not we all understand like what the vision for the organization is from an improvement standpoint. And I think to your point, if I hear you correctly, or if I interpret it maybe a little bit differently, is like we can get stuck in that stage three because stage three is oftentimes a place where we have enough sphere of control, and so we almost like self-isolate at an organizational level. And then once we break through that boundary where we see the organization as kind of a living entity, a living system, then we can move to that stage four. But yeah, if you have fisticuffs that happen on a regular basis between program lines or product lines, probably a good signal that there's a opportunity for global shared awareness of what the organizational goals are, because that usually leads to a lack of focus. And if there's a lack of focus, that means everything's important. And then, not to be too cliche, but if everything's important, then nothing's important, right? So, Rachel, what do we have in terms of the poll results here?
Yeah, so we'll take a look. Yeah, probably not surprising based on what you both were just talking through. And I guess this is a good point too. We'll definitely look at tailoring the next little bit of this session to those probably one, two, three stages, and maybe look at like a sneak peek of that stage four for the group. So thanks everybody for your participation on that one.
Awesome. Thank you. And Patanjali in the chat actually has an interesting question around can we have more of this dynamic perspective if we're doing something like scaled agile framework? And I actually used to run a product line called Rally Software, and we were very big proponents of quarterly kind of fixed mindset planning. Like, this quarter we're going to do this stuff, we're going to do these things, we have these people. And it became clear pretty quickly that that wasn't actually fast enough, if you will. Like things changed in that 3 month period between quarters when we were doing program increment planning or big room planning. And what we really started to look at was how we approached monthly steering. So monthly steering became like a very important part of our organizational perspective. It allowed us to take in new information, to make adjustments to the plan. But then you start to rely too on some of those other just ceremonies to ensure that we're doing adaptation based off of data that was coming in. So, still keeping with having your meetings, your stand-ups and things like that, having more programmatic stand-ups. But one of the things that we did really implement was monthly steering. And so the quarter became one of these things where we looked at, okay, hey, at the end of the quarter, we want to be in this particular place. And we used monthly steering to really adjust, make micro changes based off of how we were progressing in those increments over the course of the months that were part of the quarter. All right.
Can
So,
I just
yeah,
make a comment, Shannon?
yeah.
You bring up another one of those sort of pernicious points about uh, well, I'm going to abstract that. The speed at which things happen is in your context. And the challenge about fixed frameworks, safe quarterly PI planning, anything like that, it's a great place to start. But if you're still doing it 5 years later and wondering why things aren't working better, maybe you missed something about trying to tailor a way of working to our context that meets the speed and the need that we face. Because, people who, have to create giant hunks of metal and bending and think they might work very differently than somebody just doing a web app.
Right.
And, so the challenge about having the greater mindset of flow and adaptability and agility is it's constant. It's relentless. There is no let's sit back on our laurels. It's the hardest thing that I do all the time. And so I hope that helps answer the folks who are wondering about certain frameworks. Just you got to find something that works at the speed or slightly faster than the speed you need it.
Love that. I love that insight. And I think, looking at that stage one, um, oftentimes, I don't know if you've seen this, John, this is one of the things where when we look at like disparate tooling, and this is why it's in stage one, is that usually tooling is that first thing that an organization tries to use to solve the underlying people and process challenge. So the most common issue is just like, it feels chaotic. I want to understand why it feels chaotic. So I'm going to put a tool in place and hopefully it will give me an understanding of the chaos, which is a great place to start, honestly, right? Like it's like I can't actually improve myself if I don't have some data. So let's just get any data, even if that data says things are crazy. And the tools are great. They're awesome. But oftentimes what that does is then it leaves us the people and the process component completely out to the side. And we're just kind of hoping that that's going to help. And so we're like, okay, we got to then now improve through the process because it turns out the people are really what makes things happen. And so we get to that single departmental visibility stage, so that next one. And these first three were the ones that folks said that they were mostly in, which actually reflects a lot of our data. And this is where like, okay, we have tools, the visibility is improved, but we actually have to shift our collaboration to be more all-encompassing because it's not just me, it's not just my single team. So this is more of like the team of teams challenge, I'd say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the it is accidental that the first bullet of the manifesto is all about collaboration, individuals and interactions over process and tools. It's so easy to just stay, like you mentioned the one slide of stay in your lane. It's so easy to stay there, and you have to work hard to collaborate. The best performing teams that I've seen are where kind of layer above the teams have each other's back. They're not fighting for their own little fiefdoms, but rather they understand that big picture and can help the layers below collaborate and see the big picture and work towards it. So yeah, absolutely. Breaking this. I mean, it's a great start, but yeah, breaking that down by getting that collaborative and that bigger picture throughout is key.
And then that leads us to that next stage around the program level alignment. Most folks said that they were in like one of these first three stages. And that's again, like we're continuing to break down those barriers, but this is usually what we'll see as a pro pattern between stage two and stage three is that someone's or a group of someone's are typically like the change agent force, and they start to see success within that kind of single departmental view. And so, for example, in my product life, I've never been able to successfully deliver product without the involvement of engineering, marketing, my sales organization, like literally all the functions that actually help me get product to market need to really be intimately involved in how we're operating and what we're doing and what the plan is and what our objectives are. And I need to know, for example, here at Tempo, what is Marie, our CRO, what are her objectives for the year so that I can make sure we're in alignment with what we're actually doing on the product product side, the same for our success leader. And so you start to see that success happen at that kind of individual level. And then all of a sudden, people are like, oh, what are you doing over there? Or they get pulled into it and they start to feel that connection and that collaboration. Derek had a comment here, which was basically like, if there's a they conversation in a planning session, you're probably at stage 3, which I'd agree, or maybe even stage 2, because that means we've probably not actually surmounted the challenge of bringing everybody who's actually related to the success of everything happening into the room to really see themselves as how they fit into the system. So that program level piece is usually, once we get there, like honestly, I feel like you've got a success model probably already in place inside of the organization, because it requires multiple functions within the business to actually get to this place. It means that we've surmounted the resistance, and everybody understands the rationale of why it's important to bring all these different pieces together. We're actually seeing what we produce as a system or a network effect versus just individual buckets that all magically at the end of the day start to deliver wonderful things in concert with each other. And this is where, the people component is usually really seen too, because we start to typically truly understand where resource allocations become a constraint, where team allocations become a constraint, because we see that network effect. We can't have a platform team that's feeding 5 different product lines and assume that platform team is going to be, able to feed the rest of the organization effectively unless we understand the constraints of that group, which then rolls down into how is our marketing team potentially going to launch, for example, a new card for card member services this year. So this area I think is actually really meaty, for me at least, in my experience. And if we're getting a good model at this program level alignment piece, that means that we probably have a really good model to then expand to the rest of the organization, because a portfolio tends to be lots of programs and product lines all working together. John, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I have trouble getting away from the thought of how much harder does remote work make this? And I wonder if there's, correlation, so to speak. But th this is hard enough if you're all in a room and, so to speak, in the same building, not different floors. But because a lot of this is that constant repetition of where we're going, what's the direction, what are we doing around the water cooler, the coffee maker, at lunch, just randomly overhearing it as you pass a conference room. Who knows? But all that stuff has to be planned and scheduled and put in a stupid calendar to make it happen,
Yep.
or, like just Slack overload. And I mean the tool, not actual, really valuable Slack, as in time to think.
Yep.
So that just pops into my head a lot lately is, um, how is this, how easy or hard is this because of remote to make
Yep.
this happen?
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing here, and perhaps this is a sub thread that we're not necessarily calling out that we can call out right now, which is, we have to be deliberate in all of our activity, right? Or else we're just kind of doing rituals. And I've spent some time working at GitLab, which is a fully remote organization globally. Thousands of employees, all remote. Pre-pandemic was remote, and we were extremely deliberate about how we connected as a team, how we connected as an organization, what that rhythm looked like, giving people even the permission to like not be involved in things, which is usually one of the challenges with remote work. Like, you should be asleep. You shouldn't be up on this meeting because you're on the other side of the planet. And just actually having playbooks, that we can run to successfully keep our organization aligned to each other. I think even there's some comments around AI and what does agentic development do. Like, your business should probably have an AI playbook too around how we're thinking about this strategically, what sort of outcomes we're looking to achieve, and so that intentionality I think is really important, which comes to the people piece, right? If we're intentional with our people and we give them processes that they understand that actually create a better connection in their day-to-day work life, since we spend so many hours of our living life at work, then it becomes kind of a nice a holder or container for the success that we can create. And it keeps us away from just regressing back to we'll use tools or we'll use tooling frameworks to solve for a particular challenge that's actually a human one. But intentionality is, I think, super important, which is
Great point. Yep.
how we get to that stage 4, I think, too, that intentional leap. It's a leap, and it definitely needs the interesting buy-in. I bet there's a lot of folks that are on this call who have, broad organizational buy-in across maybe their squishy middle, their leadership level that gets kind of pressed between the strategy conversation and the execution conversation. We call it the squishy middle here at Tempo. We love the squishy middle. And we have to be intentional if we're going to really connect those two pieces together. So that intentionality, I think, actually moves into this stage 4 of the SPM piece. And then once we get that part, then we're in stage 5, where now we have sensing organization, we can pull in things, and then eventually we're in organizational flow, where kind of like a body or a system, we can pull in data, understand whether or not that data is having an impact on us. A good example of this would be thinking about your organization. A lot of people now, even without diabetes, are wearing, monitors to understand their blood sugar so that they can optimize their health. And so thinking about all the little signals that we can get as an organization, treating the organization almost as a body so that we can change and modify those behaviors. But in the last 10 minutes that we have here on our call, we're going to talk a little bit about the good, the bad, the ugly, and then also any questions that the group has. So, John, we talked about good patterns, bad patterns. We'll end on a high note. So we'll start with tell me about the kind of the worst that you've seen and what made it bad, and I'll give you my example as we wait for some questions to potentially come in.
Oh, well, I think it's we touched on it a little bit, but there was a culmination of sort of my frustration with an organization I was working with to help move them product wise into some bigger and bolder ways to go. And they were so bogged down by so many options and so many choices and so many things they're working on. And they were a fairly well-behaved group of executive leadership. And I sort of dramatically got up from this big, beautiful walnut table, slammed my hand on the ground and said, "I'm going to drop the F-bomb," which is not okay in the office in this
Right.
particular place.
Yep.
And of course, their eyes are big as saucers. And I said, "What we need here," I said, "focus." So, it's simple, but it's so hard. So, I mean, it's just so fragmented, and you felt like you got nothing done.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've seen that too. I've probably been a contributor to a lack of focus, which is why I love tools to help with that, especially when it comes to prioritization and how we think about prioritization. I'm dropping in the chat right now. One of the things that I use to help with putting a little bit more math into prioritization, because it's people. People have feelings. Those feelings get at the mahogany table, and before you know it, you're squibbling over something that's going to have a 5% impact on the customer happiness versus the thing that's going to have the 90% impact on the customer happiness. And I find that if we can align a little bit of math to things, then the cage fight becomes quite a bit better. And this is a tool that I've used with customers I've worked with. It's a tool that I use with the team currently. And it's fast, it's easy, and it helps you get to that nice prioritized weighting. So, based off of that, John and I love a rubric. You can do on a scale of 1 to 5 and then multiply that by 0.3, and it gives you that number. And then add all those numbers up together, and that gives you like a nice approach to just to seeing how this fits on the scale. For my folks out there who are a fan of Don Reinertson's work, weighted shortest job first is sometimes helpful, although the weighted shortest job first might not always be the right thing for your organization, but that's another mechanism. But I'd say if you run into these friction points, tooling from this perspective, rubrics, things that we can use becomes super helpful. I'll tell you one of the worst paradigms I've seen from a people process standpoint, though, was kind of thinking about a big transformation effort that was underway at a gas organization, oil and gas organization. We had one fellow there who was just, very poo-poo about the whole thing, like, oh, we can't do that here. That's not the way. It's never been that way before, et cetera, et cetera. And like a bunch of change agency at the table, really ready and excited for the change. And that fellow got up from the table, and I asked the group that was kind of there. He went to the bathroom and was like, what would help move this forward? And one of the people at the table said, this isn't going to happen until that guy dies. And I was like, well, I don't get paid to assassinate people. I'm not that type of consultant. But I think those sorts of things are actually really big indicators to barriers or resistance to change. Sometimes those folks have special knowledge. They know something that occurs in the organization, and we need to honor that. And sometimes folks they're not ready. They don't want to. And I see oftentimes that organizations, they're not open to telling those people that they need to leave. And sometimes I think we just need to be comfortable with saying like, hey, this probably isn't the right journey for you to be on. And maybe it's time for you to go find another journey because you're going to hold us back. So that's one of the things that I've seen stands out as one of the most shocking experiences I've had. But it hasn't necessarily been strange. It was just the most overt that a team has ever been about the solution to the problem. But John, on the experience share side, tell me about the best dynamic, adaptable organization that you've worked with, and what made it special.
Well, I think I was alluding to a time when we would form dynamic teams to kind of leapfrog the existing technology as the product growth was pretty rapid, and the learning just was amazing. I felt like we could we could basically kick ass and take names because we were so able to not be beholden to the legacy code base. And sometimes even to the point of, redesigning a new thing, uh, and taking away features that I loved, but I knew we'd get them back, so it's really having the guts and the nerve to be able to see the direction you need to go, be able to adapt quickly, be able to reform and reteam as needed to get there, and kind of take things, how should I put it? The sunk cost fallacy is easy to get sucked into, and just throw, okay, we'll take the penalty of having two code bases going. You can keep with the current one, but we're sunsetting that pretty soon, and the new one's going to serve all new people and then take over the old. And we did that 3 times, and then sold the company. But that kind of pattern, looking back on it, I recognize now is very idyllic, so to speak,
Yeah.
to be able to
Yeah.
do that. So
And I think the sunk cost fallacy that you mentioned is an important one because we get attached, we get emotionally attached to what we've built, we get emotionally attached to what we've invested in, and then being able to have the visibility that new things are coming. One of the things that we know from just a psychological standpoint for people is that change effort, even if it's a good change effort, is registered at the human level as a loss. And so even if it's a good thing, people tend to see it as a loss. And so what we need to do is provide that expansion. So, hey, yep, the old might be going away and the new's coming, and here's what's possible for you in the new. Here's what's possible from a career growth standpoint. Here's what's possible from a new tech standpoint. Here's what's possible for us to build for our customers standpoint, and really engaging with that. I like that story because it hits on that, right? Like in surmounting sunk costs means creating creating expansion. Well, there's only a couple minutes left here. Fun conversation today about that journey where we're going through. Obviously, here at Tempo, we're a product company. We love building products to actually help organizations on their journey. We have some very specific ones that help organizations along this pathway and along this journey inside of the Atlassian ecosystem. And John, who's joined us from Adaptavist, is one of our wonderful partners that we work with that help organizations plot their path along that journey and actually implement the change and surmount those change management pushbacks that occur. Happy for you all to reach out to hello@Adaptavist if you want more information on how they can help you along that journey. And then obviously at Tempo, we have our collections to help support the tooling with that journey. So between our two organizations, we've got people, process, and tooling covered. John, Rachel, it was awesome to chat with you. John, yep, LinkedIn for sure, hit us up. But any final points of wisdom before we head out on the rest of this October 22nd day?
John, before you jump in, we've got one last poll just to gauge the audience's interest in collections specifically. Sorry, one last poll quick. So if you do have interest in learning more about Tempo's collections, Shannon obviously mentioned tooling not being able to solve every challenge that you face on this journey, as people and process are very important as well. But we're there for you every step of the way. So these collections were designed with this journey in mind to help you as you go from stage 1 to stage 6. And we're happy to have those conversations with you and aid any conversations further around how Tempo can support you on the journey. So we'll just leave that up for just 3 seconds, and then John, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'd like to talk to sales now. Actually, I'd like to,
Yeah.
I think for me, it's really important to be able to help put visibility and see some of these things. And I know some of the we didn't share any of the products because we didn't, but there's some pretty awesome things that piqued my interest, especially even before they were available. Very cool ways, because for me, as an engineer, I love tools that help make things visible, help make what ifs easier, help me make decisions. But in the hands of a capable user, you can make beautiful furniture and musical instruments and things like that out of tools. But so for me, I think it's really powerful, the kinds of things you offer.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. And to this group, it's the journey, not the destination. We're here to hear any commiseration, to talk about what works, what doesn't work. As John mentioned, connect with us on LinkedIn, and we spend most of our days thinking about how humans can enjoy being at work more. So,
Amen.
Yep.
Yes.
With that, have a good rest of your day, y'all.